Hello, good morning. How are we all? Welcome to Female Leaders on Fire Live. And today I'm going to be talking all about toxic gender assumptions. So it's quite a big one. And these are obviously my views and opinions of what I've experienced, what I've seen my clients experience. So I would love to hear about what you've experienced and just how you think we can start to shift away from those toxic gender assumptions. So I'm going to talk about what are toxic gender assumptions. I'm going to talk about what's the impact of them. And then I'm going to talk about some things that I think, again, change that needs to happen to really create more parity and equality in the corporate world. It needs to be with us as individuals, but it also needs to be driven from the top down. So it needs to be a very cultural and structural shift as well. So I would love you to comment as I go, as I chat through, or I'd love you to leave me a question or just an opinion. And just get involved in discussion, because I think this is such an important one. And this isn't about how men view women only. This is about toxic gender assumptions from all different perspectives, especially as the gender spectrum is evolving so much and changing so much. And just how to kind of be aware of our own subconscious biases as well. So just to introduce myself, I'm Nicola Buckley, and I am the female I coach female leaders in the corporate world. I help them to find their fire. So refine that purpose, that passion, that excitement, and just fall back in love with what they do, without the sacrifice, without the neglect, or without compromising who they are, and to show up as themselves, to speak up and challenge and change the corporate world, and to shake things up, and just drive that much needed change. So I do that through corporate leadership programs. I do that through in-house coaching, through my VIP program, and through my group coaching programs, and in the old world, workshops and retreats as well. So that's who I am. So toxic gender assumptions. So I would love to know if you've heard of this term before, because you might have heard of separate terms. That might be, you might have heard of the term toxic masculinity, maybe more than the term toxic femininity. Those are quite hard to say, actually. You might have heard those more rather than just toxic gender assumptions. So what are toxic gender assumptions? So toxic gender assumptions are when we make assumptions about people because of their gender, and we kind of infer and we see certain behaviors, or we assume certain behaviors, and we assume certain ways of being, and we just almost read into their behavior, and we make assumptions about their intentions or their motivations based on their gender. So toxic gender assumptions is when it clouds our thinking, when we don't actually get to know someone, when it distracts us from being in the moment and just judging someone based on what they're saying, thinking, feeling, doing. We almost had a kind of a lead forward based on a stereotype, based on what we've already experienced before. And when it becomes toxic is when we make that gender assumptions, just when we're almost in the extreme. So we're assuming some very extreme behavior. We're assuming that someone's motivation isn't good, someone's intention is selfish, or that they're very much driven by masculine behavior or more feminine behavior. So where it gets toxic is when it's too much, when it almost clouds our vision for how things really are. And we're carrying this framework of stereotypes. We're carrying what we've learned through our experience. We're carrying and we're viewing our world, if you like, through our lens of what we've experienced so far. So toxic gender assumptions are when they overly influence the truth and the reality of what is actually going on, rather than you're seeing something in something and you're kind of leaning towards an assumption rather than just being in the moment and making an informed decision. So toxic gender assumptions, when they get to be really impactful, not in a good way, is when someone new joins the team and we're making an absolute assumption straight away, when we read into a certain behavior and we associate something more negative than there actually is with it, when we kind of leap ahead and we think how someone's going to react to something, or when we're already kind of having we're kind of defensive with someone and we're in reaction mode before we've allowed things to play out. So it can really shape our behavior. It can really limit our impact and influence if we're caught within those stereotypes, we're caught within those gender assumptions. So let's just have a bit of a think. So what do we mean by those types of toxic behaviors? So it might be that someone's creating drama out of nothing. It might be that someone's being manipulative or controlling with falsities or guilt. It might be that someone's being overly needy and not trusting themselves. It might be that someone's really negative, a bit of a mood hoover, and just being overly critical of other people. Or it might be that someone's blaming everything on bad luck and the things around them rather than actually taking responsibility. Or it might be that they're putting someone down because they're envious or jealous. And if you take that and you break it down into then characteristics that are assumed more for masculinity, those behaviors are things like assertive, ambitious, driven, being strong, being independent, being courageous, being very sure of themselves, being more logically led. And when it becomes masculine is when those typical traits are almost to the extreme. So it might be aggressive rather than assertive behavior. It might be real emotional resilience that makes them so independent that they don't share anything. And it might be that they're making assumptions or there's a subconscious bias there, and they might be leaning more towards their male counterparts rather than you as a female. So those are where it becomes toxic, is in those extremes of masculine behavior. Does that make sense? If you've witnessed any of that, just pop it in the comments. I'd love to know. And what about what the stereotypical characters of femininity? On the other hand, they tend to be tender and caring and loving, tend to be more passive and wanting to kind of fit in and be part of something, emotional, and showing that very easily and sharing that, empathetic, intuitive and leading from the heart, and also wanting to be part of a team. And when that becomes more toxic is where again it's those extremes of behavior. So it might be that they might be disgusted when they're called out on something because of their behavior. It might be when they cry sexism, when they are criticized for just their behavior in general, and that wasn't something that was actually there. It might be when they've damaged a relationship or they've been incredibly defensive. It might be that their behavior changes depending on the gender, whether it's a man or woman. So it's not toxic behavior in terms of one or the other in terms of masculine or feminine, but just in those stereotypes, in those assumptions, and in those scenarios that when they're put under pressure, that those tend to come up more and more. And really, when it comes to it, the biggest thing I want to share today is really just too much time in either of those sets of behaviors, the more masculine or the more feminine, is going to make you fake. It's going to make you feel exhausted. It's going to make you feel like you're jumping around to different things and you're trying to fit in, and you're going to feel like an imposter because you're not being yourself. Because you are, maybe there's been in your organization a real example of leading with more masculine behavior, and that's the role modeling that you see from your very senior leadership team. So you kind of assume and you adapt and you pick up behaviors that are more masculine, and you kind of draw up those more feminine behaviors and more feminine characteristics. But really, we need both of these to thrive, to be the best leader, to feel on fire. We need that combination of the more masculine doing and the more feminine being. And each one of us needs that. Every single one of us needs that, no matter what their gender is, where they sit across the gender spectrum. And really, this is all part of needing to make it the norm when women are promoted, and not congratulating them for being women who are promoted and getting press coverage and it being shared in the news, but for being promoted. And it almost, can we get to a point where we make leadership almost genderless, and the qualities that are needed for a leader of fit with that organization are the strengths of that person, rather than it being about more feminine or more masculine. So how can we start to shift this, and what can we start to do about it? A huge step to get started is really just being super honest and understanding your own biases. And it's not in a way of feeling judged or guilty or you've done anything wrong. It's just understand your inherent knowledge and your framework of how you view the world based on your upbringing. And just be aware of where you might be just really falling into subconscious biases. So you might get a new member of the senior leadership team, and it might be a man, and you might make some real assumptions about how he's going to behave, what he's going to do, how he's going to act, rather than being in the moment and just being able to support them with what they need and helping them to become a great part of the team. You might already have a fixed view. So it might be it's just another guy, he's just going to be the same as everyone else. Is he going to support women? Is it going to be a battle? And yeah. And really at its heart, diversity and equality is about being yourself. It's about almost like acknowledging people's heritage and race and gender, but also leading in a way where you are yourself. So be aware of your subconscious biases. Point number 2 is really just knowing that actually there's a structural change that's needed. There's structural changes that are needed to really help create that parity across genders. Across the gender spectrum. So that really comes down to looking at pay across the board, making sure that that's fair and that's consistent, looking at interview processes, looking at job specs, looking at how you recruit and what's involved in the process, looking at flexible working to support women or men that have had families that want to come back into the world of work, and really just setting up a structure where the business supports you across that gender spectrum and really encourages that parity and equality. Point number 3 is just really calling out unacceptable behaviour. So whether that's sexism, racism, ageism, whatever that is, it's knowing that there's a process and knowing that there's a way of calling that out without feeling judged, without being questioned, without feeling that you have to, without feeling so uncomfortable that it just doesn't feel like something that you actually want to do. And that's a really, really important, again, another structural change. Encourage that calling out behavior. Encourage that racist comment is not acceptable. That sexist boys club is not acceptable. It's just being able, or even that ageist remark, knowing, again, calling that out and set the standards of the behavior that you want to see. So that's a huge one as well. And the final one is really about a cultural shift, and that's from the top down, and that's about encouraging people to be their whole selves at work. That's all about really helping people to understand themselves and go on a self-development journey within your organization to really help them to know who they are and what they want from their career and from their life and what support they need to be the best they can be in their role. And that comes down to making sure there's diversity and inclusion support, that makes sure that there's leadership training, making sure that you're also helping people go on that self-development journey to really tune into how they're feeling, what they're struggling with, and get really clear on their values, and role modeling the behavior and the energy and that mindful awareness of how you're behaving as a leader as well. So that's it, really. So I just wanted to come on and share that I just think this is hugely important, to really just to leave those toxic gender assumptions behind and really start to see people for the impact that they're having, start to see them for what they're saying, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're doing, and appreciate someone for their strengths and the impact and the influence they have. And just really, first of all, start to become aware of any subconscious biases that you have, but also help people set a cultural shift at a structural level with the interview process, with recruitment, with making sure that the senior leadership team is really diverse over time. And those long-term structural shifts also match them with cultural shifts, and role model being the leader that you want to be, role model being someone that really sees past their own assumptions and looks to how someone's performing and then what's their impact and what's their influence. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. we've got a new episode of Female Leaders on Fire, the podcast, coming out on Friday that talks all about this in a lot more detail. So I'd love you to go and subscribe and listen. I will pop it in the comments so that you have all the details. Go and do it right now. And also, if you're interested in me helping your organisation to really shift and make those structural changes, just drop me a message and let's see how I can support you. So that's it for today. I hope you have a great Monday. I would love to know what you think. And I will speak to you again on Wednesday when we have a great guest. And we're going to be talking about very similar. See you later. Bye.